I was practically a lone ranger doing very aggressive journalism that was practically not welcomed in the part of the world I was coming from.
I know the intention of the last administration was to shut me down so that it could shut down every other person. Let's teach him a lesson so that others will not do what he's doing. I was taken into detention. My editors were also arrested and charged before a magistrate court. But that matter was thrown away. And we're all back to the field. Even though I'm still standing trial, but the job must continue going on.
24 years of democracy. That is the story of Nigeria. A country known for its vibrant media landscape and diverse voices. But behind the scenes, journalists face a dark reality. A reality of threats, attacks, and violations against press freedom to report the truth. In this documentary, we delve into the dangerous world that journalists navigate every day, shining a light on the pressing need for press freedom and safety.
Even if you had spoken the truth or written the truth, it's not a defense. What was worrying enough was if it then offended those who were in power. And for that, 2 editors went to jail.
No, I think first of all, it's important for the media and civil society stakeholders to identify the cases, to build up a database, if you will, of instances where we've seen threats and intimidation of journalists or members of civil society that have said things that certain people in power maybe don't want to hear about.
The dangers faced by journalists extend beyond physical attacks. Journalists encounter sanctions, regulations, denial of access, cyberbullying, and strategic litigation aimed at stifling their voices.
But this time around it was from citizens who were caught rigging the election, and as a result they wanted to keep me quiet. Thankfully, I was saved by other indigents who saw the importance of saving me.
Founded in 2014, the Center for Journalism Innovation and Development, CJID, emerged as a beacon of hope for media innovation and development in West Africa.
We also provide physical security support. So oftentimes we'll go distribute physical safety equipment to newsrooms and also to individual journalists when they're going out to tell stories in difficult environments.
Persons, institutions, or groups are hardly held responsible for the killings of journalists in Nigeria. Journalists and media workers are left vulnerable, their lives at stake, and justice remains elusive.
It was a traumatic period, very, very traumatic. You can't sleep well, you don't know when next they are coming. Your travel plans are disrupted because you have a court date waiting for you. If you don't appear, they will issue a branch warrant to come and take you back to jail and all of this stuff. So you can't even plan. And he has actually stunted even the growth of our media business in Cross River, because for the past 3 years, I've been practically living like a fugitive. I've been driven out of my state. Not necessarily by the state actors, but by the non-state actors. Because I got credible information that a gang was asked to kidnap me.
Throughout this documentary, we have heard from stakeholders, legal practitioners, and media executives who are determined to address these press freedom violations.
I think it's less of what journalists need to do, but what government needs to do, or if you can spin it around. It means the kind of advocacy that journalists and stakeholders need to do to ensure that government decease from what it's been doing. Because really, journalists are just performing their roles, which is constitutional, by the way. Section 22 of the Constitution is very clear as to the obligations and duties of a journalist.
This is Safe for Press, shining a light on the dark side of journalism and press freedom violations. Brought to you by the Center for Journalism Innovation and Development.
In our journey to shine a light on the dark side of journalist safety and press freedom in Nigeria, we turn to the data curated by the Press Attack Tracker of CJID. This data set unveils a stark reality of a total of 1,033 documented attacks on journalists and media organizations in Nigeria. The first attack recorded on the Press Attack Tracker is the killing of Delegiwa on October 19, 1986. Attacks recorded against journalists and newsroom are not confined to a single region. They spread across the 6 geopolitical zones in Nigeria. Up until November 2023, the South-South region has a record of 394, with Delta State at the forefront. The Southwest has recorded 247 attacks, with Lagos as the hottest zone. The North Central region witnessed 192 attacks, with the Federal Capital Territory experiencing the highest number. The Southeast recorded 84 attacks, and Anambra takes a lead on location of attacks. The Northwest had 73 attacks, with Kaduna State recording the highest number. And the Northeast had 43 attacks, with Bauchi State recording the most of the incidents.
So one of the most important learning from the Safe for Press initiative is that there is a dark side to the work that journalists do. In March 2023, we came up with the Safe for Press initiative. It was an initiative that was launched under our Media Freedom Project, and it was aimed at spotlighting the dark side of the work that journalists do. What does it really mean to be an investigative journalist? What are the dangers that journalists have to confront in the course of doing their work? How do these dangers impact their mental health? How does it impact their physical health? How does it impact their family members? And beyond asking those questions, it was important for us to address the pattern of impunity that we observe in the act of violations that are conducted or that are perpetrated against journalists. So who are the people responsible for causing them harms? Who are these people responsible for violating their rights? Who are the people responsible for killing journalists?
You wouldn't know that journalism is risky until you start doing stories that hold people accountable, that expose corruption. When you do a story that praise, people in power, journalism might look rosy, but the day you want to hold them accountable, you want to expose their corruption, their fraud, then you begin to understand that journalism is actually risky. So I didn't know it was a risky thing until I found myself doing stories independently, trying to get the truth that so many people want it hidden. So my experience at covering the jungle justice, I came across it happening where 2 men were being beaten and tortured. They were bleeding, and they kept saying they were innocent, but the people kept saying they stole mobile phones. So they were beating them to make them admit or bring out the phones. But those guys said they were innocent. They were crying, please, we did not steal the phone. And what caught my attention was a man on a military uniform was leading the mob that were beating and lynching those people. So as a journalist, I knew that was a story. Interestingly, somebody who ought to have known better, that I presume was a military officer because he wore a military uniform, was leading that mob. So I tried to record what was going on. Unfortunately for me, I got caught. And they said, this guy is recording us, he wants to expose us. So obviously they knew what they were doing was wrong, and that was why they said, this guy wants to expose us. So at that point, they descended on me. I became, the victim. In fact, it was even more painful to them that somebody was trying to expose them. So their attention was now focused on me. From nowhere, I started receiving, beating from every angle. More than 30 people were involved. From nowhere, you could just stand before you know you get a slap from the back or you receive a hit from the back, from front, back, and all that. Before I knew I was on the ground, they kept beating me. My body started swelling and all that. They stripped me off my clothes, my shirts and all that. They tore it. They threatened to kill me, that I will kill you so that I will teach others lessons, that nobody comes to this street and record what we do here. Who gave you the authority to come here?
So in 2021, I was deployed by the Center for Journalism, Innovation and Development to observe the Anambra State election. And I was posted to the Ogbaru local government. I was told, because Ogbaru is an hotspot for violence and all of that, I was told to limit my scope to Atani, which had a naval base. And I'm sure that my bosses sent me to Atani in particular because they felt that the naval base at least would pose some sort of security, because naval officers will be deployed to that place. And I also felt at ease until the day of the election. I kept going back and forth, and for every roadblock by naval officers, I was sexualized, I was victimized. I was told to get down from my tricycle, and I was searched indiscriminately. And even after coming back in the next probably 5 minutes, they do the same thing again. And there were very sexist comments like, just stay with us now. What are you doing? What sort of job are you doing? Stay with us, let's enjoy life together.
Let's look at freedom of the press. Do we really have it in Nigeria? Despite the fact that there is a constitution backing it, but do we really implement it? Whereby a story is being done against somebody who is doing the wrong thing, and before you know it, you are being picked, you can't be found, or the person is chasing you here and there, using other people to go against the story you are doing. To me, I just feel freedom of expression has not really taken place in Nigeria. The media force should be the backbone of democracy in a country generally. But does it entail in Nigeria? Let's ask ourselves that question.
You know, when you look at the Freedom of Information Act, it's like you were invited for a buffet. And then when you get there, you realize it's an a la carte.
The challenge of safety was first and foremost bad government. Therefore, after Buhari, the guy who just left the scene as president, by the way, he came first as a military dictator, if you remember, and proposed what was then called Decree 4. Decree 4 was a law that says even if you had spoken the truth or written the truth, it's not a defense. What was worrying enough was if it then offended those who were in power. And for that, 2 editors went to jail. Every time that there's bad government, the ontology of the work we do, the reality, the definition of its reality is that you have to be in an adversarial relationship with power. Journalism, if it is properly done, must do 3 things in a democracy. One, it must hold power, and actors who hold power accountable at all times. The Nigerian Constitution timidly renders it in its section 22 by saying, you know, it is the duty of the media to hold governments accountable, and then says at all times, but then offers no protection, which then is the second challenge. So you have bad governments to deal with, and therefore, you know, from the perspective of safety, that was always going to be a problem. Anyway, the second is that then there are no laws to protect you, you know, from doing the job that you are then statutorily mandated to do. The Constitution wants you to do that, to hold power accountable, but, you know, offers you no remedies, no protections in that regard. The third challenge is also an obverse of this same second question, is that you just have this slew of very retroactive and draconian laws, you know, like the Decree 4 I had mentioned to you. And in the books today, there are probably 18 to 22 bad laws, you know, that constrains the effective mechanics of, you know, journalistic work.
Agbajalingo is a prisoner of conscience and has been detained, charged, and even imprisoned. He tells us his side of the story.
Well, the treason charge, because the state cannot charge anybody for treason, was actually, what was written on the paper was Federal Republic of Nigeria versus Agbajalingo. Because when the governor ordered my arrest, I think he didn't have the courage to accept that he's the one that arrested me. So he hid under the cover of the police to make it look as if it's the police that was prosecuting me. But simply, I just asked questions about 600 million naira that was earmarked for the Cross River State Microfinance Bank. After a couple of months, the governor claimed the bank had started working. I actually sent our reporters undercover to go there and and collect account opening forms. Let us see whether any banking activities are going on in that place. We kept going there for over 3 months. And I kept asking questions here and there and found out that nothing was happening there. The place was just a conduit. I reached out to the governor personally. The people that were supposed to give me answers, I reached out to all of them. But the governor became angry. Rather than give explanations, he was asking me why I would ask him those questions. And I told him clearly, because public money is involved, and it's my duty, I'm not an interloper, it's my duty as a journalist to hold you accountable to the people. And he told me I was looking for his trouble. According to him, I was poking my fingers in his eyes. He got angry. And then one evening, I was sitting down in my house in Lagos with my wife. Operatives of the now disbanded Inspector General of Police, IRT, IGP response team, headed by Abakari then, who I eventually met in jail anyway, in Kuje prison, and I left him there too. Invaded my house and took me away. They locked me up at the RT facility. And in the morning, around 4 a.m., they brought me out from the cell where I was kept. My legs and my hands were handcuffed and I was thrown in the trunk of a Toyota Highlander. I remember, silver color. I can't forget. The same vehicle that was brought to my house to arrest me. And they took off. The journey delayed unnecessarily because I was in the trunk of the car. I didn't even know where we were. I was struggling to breathe. I messed myself up in the trunk of the car. I actually defecated on my body twice. It was that bad. And we got to you after about 26 hours because my staff were tracking what was going on. We got there. They needed to foil the car. They brought me out. I cleaned up. Then from Uyo to Calabar, I sat in the back seat and 2 cops were sitting beside me, left and right. Got to Calabar. Actually, they first took me to Transcorp Hotel. That's where the government officials were gathered. They needed to deliver me to somebody. So they made up their mind where to carry me to. So they took me to the anti-kidnapping and anti-cultism unit at the cultural center in Calabar. So immediately I got there, they brought me out and chained me to a dysfunctional deep freezer that was packed at the charging room. It wasn't working again, and they had files and exhibits inside the fridge, so my 2 hands were manacled to the fridge. And each time I want to eat, they will take out my right hand. If I eat, they return it. From the onset, they even gave me a bowl that I was easing myself in, but after some time, the commander started allowing me to go to the very, very terrible restroom that they had there. When I finished, I come back and then they chained me to the fridge. I was in that condition for 34 days before they took me to court. It was when I got to court that I learned I was no longer being charged for my report on the microfinance bank. It was about terrorism, treasonable felony, attempt to overthrow the president and my state governor, and cultism. I was wondering, how do you overthrow a sub-regional government? You know, I don't have an army. The police did not see me with a knife. They didn't see me with a gun. They didn't see me with anything. But I went through that. I was kept in prison for 6 months, and the trial lasted for 3 years. They couldn't call one witness against me. Actually, when I went to jail, my wife was actually 3 months pregnant. After 15 years of waiting for a child, after our marriage, she lost the pregnancy. She didn't want to tell me. She was acting strong. When I came out and I heard that she lost the child, you can only imagine how I felt after waiting for 15 years. I wasn't around. They just suddenly came, plugged me away from her. Every day she wakes up, she doesn't even know the fate of her husband. They're charging me for crimes that if I'm convicted, she will never see me again. The first 2 charges, death sentence. The last 2 charges, life imprisonment. So if for any reason I was convicted, she would never see me again. All those things contributed to making her lose her baby. 1st of February 2020, I was still in jail when my brother, who was practically like my own son, my younger brother, who was working in Cross River, was Philip, died. I believe that he died because something keeps telling me that if I was out there, I should have known what to do. Maybe he would have still died, but I would have made some effort. There's a proverb in my language that if you have somebody, you will die with medicine in your mouth. But my brother died without medicine in his mouth. And when they were taking his corpse home, the following day, I begged the authorities. I said, please, can you pass the corpse through the hospital or take me to the hospital, to the morgue? Let me drop a flower on his grave. I will never see him again. I'm in jail, they are taking him to go and bury. Please, allow me see him. They refused. I broke down in prison because of his death, and I cried the whole night. I couldn't do anything for more than a week in that prison. Because till today, every time I think about it, even if I'm in the midst of anything, I am broken. Because I feel that I failed him. I feel that I was the reason he died. And there's also a feeling of bitterness that arises in my heart anytime I think about it, against those who incarcerated me. I'm still struggling to deal with it. And I hope that over time, that won't be the case.
When a journalist is picked up, when a media house is visited or they are sanctioned wrongly, there is a coming together, you see press releases. The Nigerian media speaks out against repression of the press. This is one area where collaboration works very well in the country, and this helps us as a country to know that, yes, we have hope. There might be repressive tendencies, but the Nigerian press is not going to stand, doing nothing while that is happening. We had a journalist who is in the northern part of the country who, wrote a story about the governor, and because of this, he got a call from his village where his mom was asking him what work exactly. His mom, who is not somebody who has formal education, was asking, what exactly do you do that I'm asking people tell me to warn my son? So it can be that personal when you do journalism work. And he's had to move his office, he has had to move his family away from the state in which he operates. We find that when people challenge power that is so close, like the governments in their local area or the government in their state, they feel the heat quickly, more than those who cover national issues, because you can be pretty anonymous when you cover national issues. But when you're covering a state or local government issue, the light is on you.
Haruna Mohammed's coverage of the presidential elections on the 25th of February 2023 was not without hitches. He tells us about his ordeal and how it affected his newsroom.
Well, thank you, Hilary. It's an experience I love to share, though grudgingly, because of the things that unfolded on that day. So let me give you a little bit of a background as to what happened even before the election. We have done a lot of reporting that the government in Bauchi State was not happy about, and they have profiled us even before the election, that these guys are our enemies, courtesy of the kind of journalism they are doing. We have done a lot of reporting. You could recall that the Bauchi State governor participated in PDP primaries, and in that primaries, he assigned his SAGs to serve as a placeholder for him, back home, so that when he loses the primary election at the presidential level, he will fall back, and reclaim his ticket. That was exactly what he did. So we were very, very aggressive in reporting what actually happened, how they did the whole thing and all that. We were consistent in reporting the happenings in Bauchi, the lack of good governance and all that. So before the election, we were already branded as enemies, right? And remember, some of the reporting I have done prior to that necessitated I have to relocate out of Bauchi completely because of the threats and harassment and the arrest and all that. I was practically targeted to be eliminated I had to leave. So before the election, we did an assessment as a platform. You know, Wikitim is a very small platform with negligible staff. And we felt for us to effectively cover the election, I needed to come back perhaps. So we did small assessment, and in our own judgment, I felt I could come back, participate in the elections coverage without much headache. Unfortunately, I was wrong. So I came back a day to the election, did some training with my staff and other civil society organizations. In fact, I was the person that practically trained them on how to effectively cover the elections, to use their gadget to get videos without even being tracked. Unfortunately, I was the direct victim at the end of the day. So what actually happened on the 25th of February? I drove my car to the NUJ with the intention of joining colleagues from other national dailies, because my assessment of the situation was that it wasn't healthy for me to drive my car and do the coverage alone. I could be identified easily and be targeted. So why not join my colleague and do the coverage? So that was exactly what I did. But before I arrived at the press center, the other vehicle, I was actually hoping to cover the elections in Bauchi North, which is far away from where the governor was voting. So, but the only vehicle that was remaining at the press center was the one going to Alkaliri local government, which was the home LG of the Bauchi state governor. Well, I jumped and we left for Alkaliri. So we interviewed the governor. He voted in his polling unit. We interviewed him after he cast his vote. So, you know, the norm is that after you interview these high-profile people, you have to move around, take pictures, interview the electorate. I mean, do your journalism and be able to give everybody a fair representation to also be heard, not only the elite or the governor. That was exactly what I was doing. I was just moving around like any other journalist, taking pictures, understanding the mood of the people and all that. So I saw a group of women in their numbers. I thought it was another polling booth. So as I was approaching them, of course, with my press tag, so those women say, hey, ga ɗan jarida anan in Hausa mene, oh, see journalists here. So they just begin to come to my direction. They say, hey, yalla boy, muna da korafi. So muna da korafi in Hausa means we have a complaint to make. I mean, it's very common if people see a journalist and they have grudges, they will want to get their voice, you know, amplified. So that was exactly what happened. They approached me and tell me that, look, this governor is our son. He's the son of the soil. We have produced the #1 citizen in the state. But look at us. In fact, some of them were pointing at younger women who have graduated. They were complaining that they have submitted their CVs to the governor repeatedly. None of them got any job. All the empowerment programs done by the governor in their community, those women were not beneficiaries and all that. They were complaining, you know, which for me was legitimate to hear, was legitimate to amplify. As a journalist, that's my responsibility. So I said, fine, I think you guys should speak to me on camera. They said, why not? They were ready. So I started filming. Guess what? My judgment of the whole thing was that this is just a mere interview with the voters. If my judgment, for example, told me that interviewing these women at that particular time was inimical, I would have gotten another means to get their voices without really exposing myself to danger. But the whole thing, I thought it was an innocent interview. So I just started filming those women. So unknown to me, there were a group of talks by the side who were watching all we were doing with the women. So immediately I ended the interview, they approached me to tell me, hey, what are you doing with those women? So you are trying to expose the governor? So they approached me and very aggressively wanting to really grab my phone. I said, hold on, I'm just interviewing these women. In fact, you guys don't have to worry. I belong to the governor's press script. How will I do something that will be inimical to the governor? I tried to really de-escalate. And I succeeded in really de-escalating them at that moment. So I didn't know that the whole thing has even got to the security detail of the governor. that this guy is here today trying to expose the governor. Remember, I gave you a little bit of a background of where we are coming from. So those guys immediately came and said, hey, you come. The security detail of the governor. The guy came and just grabbed my phone. I opened it. I opened the phone, and he saw the short clips, in my phone. So he said, okay, so you are here today to embarrass our governor. You are interviewing these women who were against the governor. We know you, at least we know your history. This is where you are coming from. So you are the enemy of the governor, and here you are. I said, no. That is not the intention. The intention is to listen to them, to give them a voice. That is my job as a journalist. So we just finished interviewing the governor. It's only fair to listen to the other side, to listen to people also, hear their opinion about leadership and all that. So to them, no, I was directly trying to challenge the authority of the governor in his own hometown. So guess what? As we were having that conversation, those talks returned immediately. And before I know it, those guys were just hitting me left, right, and center with everything at their disposal until I was weeks away by the security detail of the governor. So that was how they deposited me at Al-Kaleri Divisional Police Headquarters. And then about 2 hours later, they brought a Hilux vehicle and transferred me to the Criminal Investigation Department at the State Police Command. That was how I was detained for 5 days. I was taken to court and was remanded in prison until I later got bail. So that is just a summary of what happened on February the 25th.
When a journalist is arrested, is charged to court. Of course, it looks like the due process of the law is taking its course, but even the arrest itself is not in line with the law. Even the process of prosecution, sometimes people spend weeks in detention under the guise of investigation before they are charged to court, and ultimately the charges do not stand up in court. So it's a whole waste of public resources. So that loose use of legitimate means, including legislations, to attack journalists has been on the rise. And maybe that wouldn't be so surprising post-military rule in 1999, because Nigeria is a democracy. So those who want to silence journalists will find new ways of ensuring that they are silenced. A good case in point would be Mr. Agbajalingo, for instance, with what he did some years ago. And Cherub had gone to court on his behalf. And incidentally, the ECOWAS court agreed with us in that instance and even awarded 30 million naira damages in his favor against the federal government, which the federal government is yet to pay, by the way. So I think it's less of what journalists need to do, but what government needs to do. Or if you can spin it around, it means the kind of advocacy that journalists and stakeholders need to do to ensure that government desists from what it's been doing. Because really, journalists are just performing their roles, which is constitutional, by the way. Section 22 of the Constitution is very clear as to the obligations and duties of a journalist. It is the contextual use of those powers, legitimate use of straight instruments to oppress and silence journalists that has put journalists on the defense. So for instance, look at the context of these. Defamation is a civil wrong. Libel is a civil wrong. It means that it's not a crime. It need not feature in our criminal laws in the first place. It means that if you believe someone has said or done something that's defamatory, of course, you have access to the courts, and it's a civil case. It means if you prove your case, and that is an entirely different matter, you can get reliefs, which include damages, retraction, and all that. So, and truth is a defense to defamation. It means if what you said as a journalist is the truth, then you really need to, you have a good defense. All you need is a good lawyer.
Maybe I could have also gone back and arranged, some guys to, maybe if I see any of them somewhere, I will just call one or two of my friends to attack them back. Because somehow I've been seeing some of them around, but I don't want to take the law into my head. I expect the government to do this thing for me because it is their responsibility to do their job, to protect the lives and properties of citizens and journalists in particular when they are discharging their responsibility.
So in that instance, can we say this is what journalists should do or what the government should do? But if I'm going to recommend anything, it is for journalists, in keeping with the ethics of their profession, which I believe is the case in Nigeria, is to ensure that the advocacy for freedom of expression is understood. And when in the context of this conversation, the media also need to understand, and that means journalists in every segment of journalism should understand, that the advocacy for freedom of expression is not only limited to journalists. Citizens must enjoy that right, so journalists will enjoy that right. So the advocacy for freedom of expression should not be limited to freedom of the press. Freedom of expression is a constitutional right that accrues to every citizen, including journalists. And that is why what I would recommend that journalists should do is to consistently advocate for freedom of expression as a fundamental human right, rather than looking at it from the narrow point of view of advocating for freedom of the press. Because it is also the freedom of expression that guarantees that the journalist has an audience. Because freedom of expression is a two-part thing. It means the right to listen and to impart. If the journalist does a very good work and people cannot listen and respond to it, then they are not enjoying their rights. So the advocacy for freedom of expression for the citizens, I think, forms one of the paramount things that the journalists can do in this instance.
Well, we don't look at it as an isolated issue of journalism safety, but we look at it in the context of political rights and freedoms of the press. And we think if you want to have a healthy democracy, these are all rights that need to be protected. I think you need to start raising awareness in the broader public, but also more specifically, I think, with those who have the power to kind of like change the environment, which can be people in executive, which can be people in parliament, depending on what the exact context is that we talk about. And I think we also probably should not only think of governments, but also of private entities that tend to resort to certain behavior that's not very democratic anymore once their interests are under threat.
A free and independent press is one of the most important symbols of democracy. And we cannot debate that, and I don't expect anybody to debate that. And that's because of the peculiar role that the media plays. Don't forget that the fundamental right of citizens to know has been held as sacrosanct and is reflected in various conventions, declarations, and so on, particularly the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The media exists pursuant to that right to know of the citizens. That is where we actually derive our legitimacy. Because if you say the people have the right to know, how do they know? They can only know through the media. It is the media that brings information from government, from the people, and put it in the public domain. So to that extent, that rule is very, very important. And that is why the independence and the freedom of that media needs to be jealously guarded so that they can freely perform that role. Over time, it has been demonstrated that societies where the media is free, the journalists are free, have better democratic practices, because it also translates to more development, because the media plays important role in development. And that is why we defend this passionately and say, do not do anything that will remove the freedom and independence. That does not mean that when we say a free and independent media, then the media can do anything. That is not the case, because there's also the element of social responsibility. And the media itself does not operate in a vacuum. It operates on the basis of certain codes of conduct. So when people say, we can't just allow you to do anything you like, but the media itself knows that it cannot do what it likes. And that is why we have the code of ethics of journalists. Sometimes it's called, code of conduct, and various standards of practice that says that we must be socially responsible, we must be professional, we must be ethical in the course of doing our work.
Journalist safety is important because when the press is suppressed, it's not just that press person that is suppressed, it's also our right to the information that the person is providing that is also suppressed. So press freedom is everyone's freedom. It's a human right because we deserve the right to know. And a core pillar of CJID's work is freedom of information as well as freedom of expression. So press freedom naturally sits within that bucket, and that's why it's important to us. And there are three key ways in which CJID does its press freedom work, three key avenues. So the first one is advocacy. So what do we mean by advocacy? We are lucky to lead a coalition of newsrooms and civil society organizations called the Coalition for Whistleblowers Protection and Press Freedom. And just like the name implies, what the coalition does is that we all work together to advocate for a better legal framework, legal system around press freedom. The second part of our press freedom work speaks to the support we provide to journalists themselves. And this could be, in many cases, psychosocial support after a journalist has been attacked, making sure that they get back. We give them the support they need to get the help that they need to get back to the mental space that is healthy. We also provide physical security support. So oftentimes we'll go distribute physical safety equipment to newsrooms and also to individual journalists when they're going out to tell stories in difficult environments. The third type of support we have provided in the past is legal support. So oftentimes when journalists are targeted by particularly SLAPPs in recent times, so SLAPPs are strategic lawsuits which are directly, essentially targeted to prevent the press person from being able to continue to write what they're writing. So we've had lots of cases there where we've had to provide legal aid to journalists who are suffering from those types of defamation, legal attacks, mostly from the angle of defamation. We also provide training to journalists, so whether it be training on just the subject of press freedom in general, but also training on how to protect yourself when you're out there as a journalist doing the job that you do. The third type of support that we provide, or the third type of work that we do around press freedom, centers around innovation. So one of our flagship tools around innovation is what we call the Press Attack Tracker, which basically is a tool that we use to track every time a person of the press is attacked, and we also use to track in both in real time and in collecting that data for our advocacy efforts in the end. But also in general, in addition to the Press Attack Tracker, we're also looking at various ways we can innovate, also working with a few partners, technology partners, to see more ways we can innovate to use technology to make sure we can nip attacks in the bud, or at the very least, make sure that there is early detection or early warning when there are risks, or when there are actual attacks, there's early response to mitigate the damage of attacks against the press. So these are some of the ways in which CJID protect the press. We think that a lot of the things that we do could be done at a bigger scale, and we're calling on more partners to join us in this effort.
If there's any change I want to see around, is the change that you don't attack journalists and go scot-free.
Yes.
If you attack journalists, there is a consequence, and according to the law, you'll be dealt with decisively. Yeah. So that will also make journalists know that, okay, we have a responsible government. That will also give them the confidence to do their job, instead of resorting to self-help.
So some of the journalists that are on the database of journalists that have been murdered without their killings being resolved or anyone held accountable include Delegiwa of Newswatch, Godwin Agroko of This Day newspaper, Bayo Ohu of the Guardian newspaper, Okezie Amaruben, the publisher of news service that was shot by a police officer in Enugu State, Todwe Salem of the Vanguard newspaper, Pelumi Onifade, a student journalist that was killed during the NSAS protest, Alex Ogbu of Regent Africa Times, Omololu Falobi, a journalist and founder of Journalists Against AIDS, Precious Owolabi of Channels TV that was killed during the Shite protest in Abuja, Ikechukwu Udendo was the editor of Anambra News and was killed by unidentified gunmen in 2013. Ikechukwu Onobogu was a cameraman with ABS in Oka. He was found dead 4 days after he was reported missing by his family. Benjamin Ekong was the former treasurer of NUJ and was killed in Nasarawa State. The list extends to about 25 journalists as of today, and we're using this opportunity to call on the Nigerian government to find the perpetrators of those killings, bring them to book, and find appropriate compensation. There is no compensation that is enough for the loss of the loved ones who died in the course of their work or because of their work. But it is important that the government identify with this family and find a way to compensate them for their loss.
As far as we continue talking, as far as we continue pushing, it will eventually happen. It may not happen under our active days, but the younger set of people who are coming, I'm hopeful that they will practice journalism in a more liberal atmosphere. They will practice journalism with more confidence and with more security. We are only trying to earn a legitimate living. We are not criminals. We are not interlopers. Like I tell people, I don't arrange my arrest. I wake up in the morning and I do my work, then afterwards I see some guys come and say they want to take me away. But I hope that this will stop with the passage of time, so that you can do your work and know that you can go back home and meet your family safe and sound. We are only trying to earn a living. That's all we're trying to do. They should allow us.